It's been quite a while since I've recorded anything, well, aside from the Jungian stuff, to go on the channel. It's a combination of work and just various issues in my private life just leaving me feeling so drained and devoid of creativity that stringing three brain cells together has proved rather more effort than it's been possible to make. So this is by way of trying to get my brain back into gear again, in terms of thinking about something other than marking and paperwork and all the rest of it that has been consuming my time of the last few months. And I've been thinking a little bit about storytelling. It's been a while since I've done any direct storytelling, but I've got a few bookings coming up later this year, so it'll be changing again. Stories are an interesting thing, particularly mythology, in that primarily thinking here from a pagan perspective rather than from any other religious perspective. Pagan mythology is often not clearly attributable, if that's a real word, isn't it? Yes, attributable, in that, say, that those religions that have a sacred text, a singular sacred book, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Sikhism, and so on. Most of their, not all, but most of their stories tend to come from the book. So if they want to know who revealed this story, who made this story known, it's either a particular person who wrote a chapter in a book, although not all of the sacred texts have specified people who are meant to have written given chapters, but maybe come with the idea that the book is divinely revealed. So ultimately, of course, no matter who was holding the quill and writing it down on a bit of parchment or whatever material they were writing on, ultimately the story is attributable to the divine. It was revealed by God, and this story was, or Allah, or whoever, this story was passed on to some human being or another who picked up a quill and wrote it down on a bit of parchment, and then that was read by other people who told it to other people who told it to other people, and it's passed on and on and on that way. When it comes to stories of Zeus, of Thor, of Danu, of the various figures of ancient mythology, some of them do certainly appear in texts written by specific people. Snorri Sturluson, for argument's sake. But those people are not normally claiming to be the actual authors. They're just presenting themselves as recording traditional stories. Here's a story I heard told about these gods, those gods, these kings and queens, those kings and queens. They're not saying, I made this story up. Nor are they saying, I had a mystical vision and this story was revealed to me and now I'm writing it down. They're just saying, this is a story that's already old when I'm hearing it and writing it down. This is a traditional tale told by the people of the area I live in or I was born in, and I'm recording it for posterity. So the Greek stories may have been recorded by Hesiod or Homer, but it's them recording stories that were old when they were alive. They have not invented the story, they've just maybe coined the poetic phrases to put story to paper, but they're not the ones who came up with the stories in the first place. And that raises an interesting question, well, I find it interesting, as to where, both pagans themselves and storytellers who may not necessarily always be pagan, who are telling those stories, where they believe the stories come from. So were they originally dreamt up by some particular human storyteller whose name has been lost to the great tides of history? And so Fred the storyteller, or whoever it was, sat around the campfire one day and said, right, I'm going to tell you this story I've just this second made up about Odin, and here you go, blah blah blah. Or do we think those stories were received in a more mystical fashion. They were a result of visionary experiences, that it wasn't some parent trying to put the kids to sleep coming up with a bedtime story. Rather, it was a priest, a priestess, a shaman, a gothi, or whatever they were, who entered into a visionary state and had some mystical experience in that visionary state, and then came back to ordinary consciousness and said, I've had this amazing vision about the gods, and they told me this, they told me that, and they told me the other, and now I want to tell you. And they told it to their tribe, and it was told and told and told and retold, and possibly changed a bit in the retelling, as is the wont of things. And then eventually somebody or another picks up a quill and some ink and puts it down on a bit of parchment. So are we to understand these stories as revelations of the gods? And I think in a lot of cases, although obviously without the benefit of time travel it's practically impossible to prove any of this one way or the other, I think the vast majority of the stories of the gods probably did start in that way. There may be some where some kid said to their father, their auntie, their granddad, whoever it was, why is that mountain a weird shape? And the relative thought, and made a story up spur of the moment and told that story as much to try and answer a kid's question or keep them quiet or whatever, and then it proved a popular story, and it ended up being told and retold and retold, and eventually no one could remember who on earth Grandad was, but they've remembered the story. So some of them may have originated in that kind of Brothers Grimm kind of fashion, where somebody just makes up a story to entertain the kids with, or try to educate them, or do whatever. And perhaps a lot of fairy stories began that way, as either entertainment or as warnings, like the stories of the various river hags who, if you get far too close to the river, they'll grab you and drag you in and drown you and eat your bloated corpse, as a way of scaring kids off from mucking about in rivers and drowning. So they have a kind of a salutary effect in terms of wanting to disseminate a warning or information in a way that children will pay heed to, even if they don't pay much heed to, oh God, mum's nagging and wagging a finger again, whereas if it's a story of some scary monster that'll eat them, they'll pay more attention to that. So some stories may have begun in that way, but I think quite a sizable chunk of them did begin as mystical revelations. Now, how much the versions we understand today have changed from the very first revelation given after the shaman came out of the trance and said to everyone sitting around the campfire, guess what? Here's the vision. It's impossible to know how much things might have changed and been added to, or bits lost and forgotten or misunderstood. And you get that kind of Chinese whispers element as the story changes and changes and changes with the passage of time. We just can't know. But what I think is worth bearing in mind, and I've said this probably more than once in recordings, is that if those stories were revealed once, 2,000, 3,000, however many thousand years ago, they can be revealed again. So deities who are reduced to not much more than a name carved into an altar stone, and no one really knows much of anything about them, because over the passage of time stories have been lost, libraries have been burnt to the ground, and all of the stories contained in them have gone the way of all ashes, and so forth. If they were revealed once, and we accept a spiritual reality in which those beings who did the revealing still exist somewhere in the cosmos, then they can reveal them again. They can tell them again. All they need is a receptive audience. They need somebody in that visionary state who's willing to listen and hear the tale, and has the capacity to tell it in a way that brings it to life and makes it engaging for the audience, who are willing, again, to listen. So there's a succession of stages that it needs to go through. And as with a lot of things, I think if the fire is there within the story, the fire of spirit burns within the story, even if the storyteller themselves is not that particularly good at storytelling, but the fire is there, it will burn, and audiences will respond to it. They'll feel a truth within the story, and they'll want to hear it again and again, and they might repeat it themselves to other people, and the ripple takes place and it moves out. And just as first time round, no one could remember, after a few generations, no one could remember who Uncle Fred was that very first revealed that vision to somebody around the fire. So the identity of whoever gets the mystic vision and passes it on is perhaps not that important, which is maybe a little bit of a controversial point of view in an era where we're very keen to know the identities of authors, and you get lots of debate around what did the author intend when they wrote this story, thinking earlier works of literary fiction and so on. And the life of the author, if the story proves a popular one, the life of the author gets studied ad nauseum and argued over by academics as, did it mean this, did it mean that, did it mean the other. I think if a revelatory story were owned by a particular author, the first person to see the vision, experience the vision, pass it on, then it would be treated more like a literary endeavour and pecked apart by academics rather than received as a spiritual reveal about the nature of gods and goddesses and the cosmos and the ancestors and the nature of truth and reality. Something would get lost in the process. So I think there's an advantage to being an invisible storyteller, one who passes it on but doesn't make any great claims of ownership, of seizing the honour of being the first person to get that vision and pass it on to somebody else. And so not only maybe do the gods need to find somebody with a degree of talent to pass the story on and receptivity to such visionary things, but also someone who can sufficiently park their own ego and maybe park the prospect of making money out of minting a story and selling it on as a literary endeavour or whatever, that the story can go out into the world without being attached to a particular person who ultimately doesn't matter very much, because it needs to go beyond that kind of lit crit thing where the author is terribly important and the era they lived in is worth studying to the nth degree in order to pick apart all of the hidden symbolisms and the meanings and the power dynamics and all the stuff that literary theorists go on and on and on about. If the spiritual truth of the story is to be apprehended. So it comes as, I think, the story, both potentially in terms of reviving the story these days, but also the original versions of the stories we are now familiar with, would have come as gifts from the gods, not so much to specific individual storytellers, here's a gift to you, but rather here is a gift to the community, and you're the one that's got to do the unwrapping and pass it on to that community. And then it's no longer the kind of the property of one particular storyteller, it becomes the property of the community, of the culture, of the tribe, and they pass it on generation to generation to generation. That idea of story as gift is one that does interest me. To have the gift in the sense of a talent, a skill, an ability, to spin a good story, to weave words and images and the flow, the music of the language, and create sensations and thrills and spills and twists and turns within the story. That is a considerable talent, and there are distinct types of sort of subsets of that talent. The ability to do it as an oral tradition is distinct from the ability to do it as a written work. They are two interrelated but separate sets of skills and abilities. and thinking here mainly, I suppose, really about the oral side of it, because even though you've got your Homers and your Hesiods and your Snorri Sturlusons and all the rest of them, who did eventually put pen to paper, behind them were umpty generations of now pretty much forgotten oral storytellers who had kept those tales alive and passed them on and on and on and on until one day they landed on paper. An oral storytelling is a very particular set of skills. So they've got to have those gifts, and having the gift, I think, then behooves you to do something useful with it, to pass it on for the benefit of other people, to, whether it's entertaining the kids or telling it to a bunch of adults sitting around a campfire, passing the mead horn round and becoming engrossed in the story of all of the various characters and what they did and how they did it, and then thinking about how that relates to them and their lives and their sense of belonging and tribe and culture and all the rest of it. So it's a gift from the gods to the teller, from the teller to the tribe they are telling to. And originally it would have been almost entirely people that they were in the same tribe as, people they were related to. In time, of course, it then leaks out of one tribe and is told to the next tribe and the next tribe and the next tribe, and it kind of spreads out. And so the stories of the Greek gods, a particular story of Hera or whoever, may have started in one particular tribe, but by the time it's told for the 100th occasion, it's then being told to 30 surrounding tribes, and it's become part of their wider Greek culture rather than just one tiny little tribe in which one particular storyteller who very first got that vision lived. Is kind of gone large, gone viral, I suppose we might say, and spread out. So things become part of a collective. They become ways of bonding people together, which again is part and parcel of what a story does. There is the entertainment, there is the educational element, but there is the identity creating element. This is our story, and that makes it something special. And whilst other people from other parts of the world, as today, you can read Greek stories without being Greek, you can read Japanese stories without being Japanese, you can read Norse stories without being Norse, and they're interesting and they're engaging and they're all of that, but what you don't have is the sense of this is my story, unless you actually are Greek or Japanese or Norse or whatever it may be. Then it becomes your story. It becomes a bonding story, whether you want it or not, because clearly not every Japanese person is going to be interested in Japanese mythology. Not every Greek person is going to be interested in ancient Greek mythology. So not everyone is going to say, oh, this is our story, and kind of feel that sense of ownership and belonging. And the ownership is not that you own the story, it's more the other way around. The story owns you. You are part and parcel of a lineage of which this story is a thread within that big tapestry that you're part of. And so whether you want to be owned by the story maybe is a bit of a debatable point, but enough people do. They feel that sense of, this is a story which my great however many generations over worth of grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and Lord knows what else partook in, and now I am partaking in it, and now I can pass it on to my children or my nephews and nieces or my young cousins or whatever they are. I can pass it on to the next wave, and again this continuity becomes part of the gift of the story. It bonds all of those people together, and not just bonding people, of course. A lot of stories bond to the land because they are stories of the land, as well as stories of gods and goddesses who live within the land, and fairies and elemental beings and whatnot. It's the story of why that mountain is a weird shape, or how come that river flows in the direction it does flow in. Why are things the way they are? It's a way of understanding not only how you belong to other people and other people belong to you, but how you belong to the land, because this is the story of the land. And again, you could have people who are very distant. their ancestors emigrated to some other bit of the world and they've grown up in that other bit of the world. They've never actually been to the homeland, maybe, of their great 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 grandparents. But the story gives them a sense of echo to that land, and maybe one day they will want to go on holiday and visit that land and go, oh, that's the mountain, that's the river. Now it starts to make sense in a different kind of a way. These stories I've heard about my ancestors are also stories about a land that I am now walking in, rather than the land that I've just watched a TV show about, or looked at some glossy coffee table book with nice photos of. I am now actually physically walking there. I'm seeing the places that these stories are about, and that again becomes a gift. It becomes a bond that, even though you may not have been born there, you may not have grown up there, you may only have arrived yesterday on an airplane to come and visit it, it's opening up to you. It's becoming part of you, and you are becoming part of it. You're linking to it through the story, and understanding the function of that story. And in a sense, I think it's then becomes a gift from you to the land. Not just to tell the story to a tree or a river, which might be listening, but picking up on Harold Proshansky's argument around place identity, that if you identify with a place, whether that's a building or a town or a village or a hill or a river or a forest or whatever, if you identify with it, then you extend your positive feelings towards it. Maybe you make the extra effort to look after it, to pick up litter, to chain yourself to a tree if there's somebody or another is threatening to chop it down and turn it into a car park. You go the extra mile to look after it, whereas if you had no link to it, you had no bond to it, you didn't give a toss about it, then would you go and chain yourself to a tree to protect it from being bulldozed over? Would you look at the litter on the ground and go, meh, and chuck a bit more there, rather than pick the litter up and clean it and look after it and nurture it? So if you make that story bond link, I think that inspires you to go the extra effort to look after the place you have identified with, you've bonded with, a place whose story has grabbed you, taken you, drawn you into it, and that then inspires you to want to do the extra bit for the place, for the people, for the culture, for all those multiple layers of being become something you want to participate in, you want to be part of, you want to engage with. And so that giving, that exchange of gifts, it exists at a multiple series of layers. And the story is part of what kickstarts. It's not the only bit. You could go to a land you know no stories about whatsoever, and just be so inspired by the beauty of the landscape that you bond to it. So I'm not suggesting that you absolutely have to have the stories, because you can get the bonding without it. But the story brings a form of bonding. It enables a form of bonding to take place, including to landscapes that you physically may not actually have visited yet. But you start to form the kind of mental link that you know it's there, and you've read about it and you've heard about it, and so on, and you begin to link into it. So I think that is all part and parcel of the gift of story, the giving from one to another. But perhaps I'll leave that there as a shorter than usual ramble, well, shorter for me anyway. Hopefully it might kickstart my brain into saying a few more sensible things later on about other topics. But yes, anyway, it'd be interesting to hear from people who either are themselves storytellers or just like consuming stories, reading them, becoming part of them, how you feel stories have changed your sense of identity, your sense of belonging, your sense of linkage, whether to people or to the land or to anything else for that matter. And if any of you have ever had those visionary experiences of the seeds of stories that have then grown when you've told those visions to other people later. That will be a fascinating area to explore, if anyone's willing to talk about it, that is, of course. So we'll leave it there, and perhaps people would like to chip in some comments.